Welcome everyone to this gender diverse prejudice webinar. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, on whose land we are on. We pay respect to elders past and present for they hold the memories, traditions, culture and dreams of Indigenous Australia. This workshop has been put together to give people an insight into prejudice against gender diverse people. To start, a little bit about myself. I have a Bachelor of Psychology, a Bachelor of Visual Art and a postgrad and diploma in Sexology. I am currently a master's student. I am doing research into orgasmic capacity and experiences for trans women post-genital surgery. Besides my studies, I am also a artist. I do paintings, illustrations and sculptures. I am also a motorcyclist. I am also a sexuality educator and an online content creator. On YouTube, I create content that's related to art, motorcycles and gender and sexuality education. My pronouns are she, her and hers. Okay, let's dive deep into this right from the get-go. And let's start with a definition of what is prejudice. Prejudice is the unjustified or incorrect attitude towards an individual based solely on the individual's membership of a social group. So what does that mean? That means we are talking about motorcyclists. Yep. I'm a motorcyclist myself. People used to have a real bad perception of motorcyclists. They used to be rather prejudiced against them. They thought they were just outlaws, you name it. Most of us these days, we just do it because we love actually riding a motorcycle. There's nothing, we don't do it for any other reason. Another definition, discrimination. I don't use them interchangeably. Convenience within this webinar, I've said prejudice and discrimination. I'm not distinguishing a lot of the parts of them because they are very similar in that sense, but there are subtle differences. Discrimination is the behavioural actions, usually negative towards an individual or group of people. But the last one on that little picture there is oppression, which is the end production of prejudice and discrimination. They're all linked. Prejudice leads to discrimination, discrimination leads to oppression, and oppression then leads into more prejudice. So they all reinforce each other, and it's just a constant cycle. So let's then go on to what overt discrimination is. And what it is the act of treating someone unequally or unjustly. It can also manifest itself in the form of direct prejudicial treatment based on certain characteristics, such as age, gender, ethnicity and sex or sexual orientation. It's less common to see overt discrimination around these days, but it still does happen. Overt discrimination is the intentional and blatant form of discrimination, with the offender knowing full well the actions they are taking against the offendee. They don't view themselves as doing anything wrong and therefore make no attempt to hide or cover up their behaviours or actions. Examples of overt discrimination could be refusing to hire someone based on their age or race, vandalising the personal property of someone who is gay or from another country, wording something in such a way that it eliminates particular people. Another one would be denying a promotion or raise to someone with a mental health disorder. Now, subtle discrimination, this is a bit more tricky. By nature, it is far harder to spot in the workplace because the offender might know it is wrong or inappropriate but does it anyway. These are acts that are covert and hard to identify, such as comments, jokes, or other behaviours that make people feel uncomfortable or unwanted. Subtle discrimination can be difficult to prove and can be intentional or accidental. It's often based upon deep-rooted opinions or beliefs. The tricky part of subtle discrimination is that it is frequently considered socially acceptable, as opposed to overt discrimination, where it's considered to be politically incorrect. Subtle prejudice could take the form of telling a joke about a gay person to a co-worker, hiring a token employee to prove you are not being discriminatory, making a comment to a person that they cannot do a thing just because of a characteristic they have. Now, I'd like to cover a couple other things that can go along with this kind of discrimination. There's implicit and explicit biases and prejudice. An implicit prejudice is an unconscious association, belief or attitude toward any social group. Due to implicit prejudice, people may often attribute certain qualities or characteristics of all members of a particular group, a phenomenon known as stereotyping. I will stress this, they operate almost entirely on an unconscious level. You have no idea about them. Such prejudice do not necessarily align with your own sense of self and personal identity. In many cases, people can hold positive or negative associations with regards to their own race, gender, religion, sexuality, or any other personal characteristic. You can have implicit prejudice and still express disapproval of negative attitudes or beliefs. This other side to it is explicit prejudice, and that is a conscious bias based on your attitudes and beliefs we have about a person or group on a conscious level. Much of the time, these prejudice and their expression arise as a direct result of perceived threat. Why is that? Well, when people feel threatened, they are more likely to draw group boundaries to distinguish themselves from others. They will use mental shortcuts in order to manage that threat. In these situations, when people do perceive their prejudice to be valid, they are more likely to justify unfair actions against the target. As with overt and subtle prejudice and implicit prejudice, explicit prejudice can have a long-term impact on the target's physical and psychological health. Now, what does this all look like for gender diverse people? Well, holding someone's past against them, seeing them as only the gender they were identified as at birth, asking for their real name and not accepting their name they go by. We tend to call it a dead name, just so you know. It is a name that is not relevant anymore. Consciously misgendering a person, even when the person is corrected, they still continue to misgender the person. Disallowing use of a toilet, not allowing trans women in the women's toilets, not allowing trans men in the men's toilets, insisting gender diverse people to use the disabled toilets, assuming what someone's genitals are, focusing on what someone's genitals are, inquiring whether they have had surgery when it is in inappropriate situations. The only people need to know is the ones sleeping together, forcing them to be out about the past. Not everyone wants to be out about their past. Many people are not out about big things in their lives, but this one, people want you to be out about. Sometimes it's just not safe or wise to be out about it. And there's more. So the question then comes down to, how can you help to prevent prejudice and discrimination? Be aware of your own prejudice and thoughts and address them if you find they are inappropriate or problematic. If you have questions about something that's related to like someone's gender or sexuality, ask yourself first, would you ask that of anyone else? If you would like to know something about something, ask first why you want to know. It is okay to ask questions. It's perfectly okay. But think first, do you need to know? And will it help you in any way actually knowing this knowledge? And you can always find the answer somewhere else instead of asking the person directly. You could always Google about sexuality or gender. Or if you see prejudice and discrimination towards someone, stand up against it. Don't take charge of the situation. You'll end up taking the person's autonomy away. Instead, stand up next to them and support them. Respond to idle comments which are prejudicial or discriminatory. That comment you just heard, was it harmless? Would you feel or react differently if it was overheard by the person it was talked about? So let's wrap things up. Prejudice and discrimination can be subtle or overt. You can display implicit or explicit prejudice and discrimination. Both subtle, overt, and implicit and explicit prejudice can have devastating consequences for gender diverse people. In fact, for anyone, not just gender diverse people. Everyone can help prevent prejudice and discrimination. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it and got something valuable from it. Until next time.